Chapter 5. The Bottom of the Sea. Ram whacked his staff across Sari's rump as she slowed almost to a standstill. "Move on, you excuse for a donkey," he yelled. Sari bared her teeth menacingly at Ram as she began walking, the load of bundles swaying. "As I was saying, Jonathan, your father is right. Something has to be done." Even as he spoke, Ram felt confused. The whole plan of escape was turning into a nightmare. On a nearby rock, a dab lizard, its green body spotted with brown, slipped quickly into a crevice and out of sight. "Right, but what do we do next?" Jonathan's thick black eyebrows rose in pointed arches just as his father Showballs did when he was thinking through a matter. "Look here, Ram. If we get enough men on our side, then the rest will have to go along or split the camp." The idea of a split camp made Ram's stomach hurt. What would he do when his father chose the other side? For his father would surely do so, as sure as the desert held sand. Jonathan held up one hand, counting on his fingers as he spoke. "For one thing, we know the rabble group that joined us to get themselves away from the Egyptians aren't going to stick with this route much longer. Already that Amorite Manetto, the one from the mines, is going around grumbling." Ram nodded his head. He had noticed the man, an Amorite of mixed blood with a cold, cruel smile. Long purple scars crossed and crisscrossed the fellow's back, and no one had questioned his desire to leave Egypt. "My father says there are at least 50 men in every tribe solidly opposed to this plan of Moses. You can add to that hundreds of others just waiting for some good leadership." Jonathan's voice fell to a whisper, and he placed his left hand on Ram's arm. "Ram, your father will just have to go along with the rest of us when the time comes." Ram nodded. He knew that Jonathan was wrong, though that nothing short of the voice of God would change his father's mind. Even if he could make his mother listen, she couldn't change his father. She would stick with him, too, no matter what price they all had to pay. Ram could feel the sun beating down through his head cover, and still the cloud that went before them made no sign of stopping. Nothing made sense. Why were they hurrying, marching on and on away from the promised land? Why couldn't they at least stop for food? He was hungry, thirsty, and yes, angry. When the white cloud stopped at last, it rested over a wide plain that lay between rugged hills rising like walls on the west and south. To the east was a papyrus marsh, and beyond that the sea of reeds. Lush green grasses waved in the breeze, but except for the way they had entered, there was no way out of the plain. All of Ram's fears had come true. Blue water sparkled in the sun as far to the east as Ram could see, and the air was sweet with the smell of it, but Ram felt no gladness at all. At the edge of the water, Nahala twisted her long brown hair into a knot. Kicking off her sandals, she waded in to join Tirzah, who was already knee-deep in the shallows. Tirzah let her hands trail beneath the surface, wringing her fingers like small white fish. All around her, people were standing in the water, laughing and talking. Children splashed each other happily. It was as if this were the promised land, and they had arrived. Out of breath, Maha, her face redder than ever, joined them. "Oh, that feels good," she said. "Do you know, Tirzah, I could stay right here forever? Just think how lovely it would be to live by the shore." "Yes, and the mountains," Tirzah said, straightening her body and looking back at the hills circling the plain like sleeping giants. She wouldn't mind camping here for a long time. Maybe the cloud of God had hurried them here just for that. Jerioth made the meal, a delicious broth of dried onions and herbs whose smell made the mouth water. Tirzah sat cross-legged, listening to the sounds that carried so clearly here on the plain. She could hear her Uncle Showball's voice raised in argument. Her mother, hearing it too, was cross. "Not again! Will that brother of mine never stop?" In the little crowd of men standing by Showball's tent, Tirzah made out her uncle, gesturing wildly as he talked. The voices of a number of the men rose in loud shouts of "No," and then "Unite, we say." They were drawing attention, and others were joining them. Tirzah couldn't hear above the noise, but suddenly there was a hush as two men made their way to stand on a great outcrop of rock facing the people. It was Moses and Aaron. Moses lifted his hand for silence. "Listen to me." Moses' voice seemed to Tirzah to be right next to her. It was so clear. "Yahweh is leading us, and this is the way he has chosen for us to go. You must not turn away to your own route, or you will be lost. Yahweh will fulfill his promise to lead us to Canaan." From the listening crowd, Tirzah heard her uncle's voice cry out, "How can this be the way to Canaan? Are we to go through the sea, or over the mountains, or back the way we came?" Other shouting voices joined in. "Back the way we came, before it's too late." Angry voices raised above the first one shouted, "We are with Moses and Yahweh. We follow the glory." Soon a chorus of loud voices chanting, "Follow the glory," drowned out the protesters. When it was over, Moses dismissed the people and went back to his own campfire. Tirzah's eyes burned with staring, and her voice was hoarse from crying. Follow the glory. She had stood with her father, and together they walked back to their site. Oren was there with Jerioth, her mother and the twins, but Ram was nowhere in sight. Her father went straight to her mother and held her close. It will be all right, my love, he said. Something good will come from following this route. Yahweh will guide us. I was so afraid there would be a split in the camp, but what you say is true. Something good will come of it. I am ashamed to be related to that showball. Her mother stood back, a fire kindling in her eyes. I'm of a mind to tell him what I think. Tirzah smiled as her father laughed his deep from the toes up laugh. Look, Tirzah, what have we here? A lioness ready to eat up that mouse showball? We are lucky she doesn't growl at us. Lioness, am I? We shall see. We shall see. Meanwhile, I have work to do. Come, Tirzah. Her mother turned toward the bundles, waiting to be undone. Late in the afternoon, Ram returned. He sat by himself, silent, his mouth set in a tight line. Tirzah ignored him. If Ram listened to their Uncle Showball, then he deserved to suffer. And their prig of a cousin, Jonathan, too. They'll both be sorry once we get to Canaan, she thought. Without warning, the terrifying sound of the ram's horn blew shrilly in sharp echoes all over the camp. Tirzah, startled, turned to stare to the north. Runners were racing toward them. Breathlessly, they shouted the news. The Egyptians are coming! The Egyptians are coming! The scouts have seen them to the north! Chariots! Warriors! The Pharaoh, too! Quickly, flee! Without thinking, Tirzah ran to the tent and began pulling it down. Beside her, Jerioth's strong hands undid the stakes, and together they drew ties and all into the bundle. All over the camp, people were wailing or shouting orders, hurrying madly. What will we do, Jeraheel? Where will we hide? Her mother's hand reached tremblingly for his arm. Stay with the children, Leah, and pray. He answered quickly. We are still ahead of them. I must go and see what Moses says. We will do what he directs. In a moment, Jeraheel was gone. It is Shobal you should listen to, Ram shouted after him. Her father did not stop. Tirzah whirled to face Ram as he spit out his words. None of this would have happened if we had gone straight on the path to Canaan from the beginning. Now there is no escape but this one. From his belt he pulled his long knife, waving it in the air above his head. We'll fight to the death, he shouted. They're not going to take us back as slaves ever. Before anyone could speak to him, he was running toward Shobal's campsite. No, Ram, no, her mother screamed. Tirzah put an arm about Leah's shaking shoulders. Let him go, mother. He'll go anyway. Tirzah hurried back to help the twins and Jerioth, who had already saddled the donkey. Oren held onto one of Sari's long ears, patting her head and speaking gently to her. Again and again, Tirzah looked to the north, staring until her eyes ached for any sign of the approaching army. They were not yet in sight. Silently she prayed, Yahweh, please don't let them take us back. There was no time to form the lines of march. Bundles thrown together were quickly secured. Tirzah tightened her belt about the bundle on her back. They were ready to go. Where, thought Tirzah, where will they go? How could they climb the mountains quickly enough? Would the Egyptians capture them? In her throat a lump rose, hard and hurting. Like Ram, she would rather die than go back to Egypt. Suddenly the thought of Abihail came to her, and she wanted desperately to find her. All about her, family stood together, waiting. She could not see Abihail's family, nor Shobal's where she knew Ram must be standing. Moses stood on the rock once more, his arms raised high above the people. Tirzah waited with her family, close enough to the rock to see and hear. Above them was the cloud of glory. Where will it lead us? She wondered. Before Moses could speak, a great cry came from the far edges of the crowd, and every face turned toward the north. Tirzah climbed quickly to Sari's back and stood upright. The sight was terrifying. Her heart jumped within her. The army of the Pharaoh was coming. It was too far away to make out anything but the great clouds of dust and what flashed within, surely the metal of swords and chariots gleaming as rays of the setting sun struck them. In anger, a man cried out, You, Moses! Was it because there was no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? A woman shouted, What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? Others took up her cry, It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Tirzah half fell from the donkey's back. As she straightened her bundle, she heard her father shout, Let Moses speak. Silence, let him speak. Other voices joined with his. Above the crowds, the voice of Moses rang out, The Lord will fight for you. Stand still and watch. As Moses spoke, the man next to Tirzah lifted his arm and pointed to the sky. Tirzah heard a murmur of astonishment roll over the crowd as one after another looked above them. Overhead, the cloud of glory moved swiftly until it settled behind them. From plain to sky, it blotted out the entire passageway and the Egyptian army behind it, as if a great curtain had been shut. Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance Yahweh will bring to you today. This time Moses' words had the sound of triumph in them, and Tirzah felt a stab of hope run through her. The man next to her was pointing to where Moses stood outlined against the sky. "Look," he said, "Moses has lifted his rod." Tirzah strained to see above the heads around her. Holding Sari's rope firmly, she tried to mount again, but each time she came close to getting up, Sari jerked away. The rising wind was making the little donkey restless. This was more than a rise in the wind, Tirzah thought, pulling her mantle across her mouth. The hot, dry east wind from the desert blew sand everywhere, seeping into her mouth, eyes, and nose. A sheltering arm went about her shoulders, pulling her close. Squinting her eyes, Tirzah saw her father's face bent over her. "It will be all right, child," he shouted. "This is the hand of Yahweh. Don't be afraid." Tirzah threw her arms about his waist and clung tightly to him. "What is happening, father? Why is the wind so high? Where will we flee?" "Stand firm and see the Lord fight. That is what Moses said, and that is what we must do." His voice was thin in the wind, but Tirzah nodded. "Can you stay with the donkey?" he shouted. "We will march together with the others, but Ram has chosen to go with his uncle Shobal." Though he was shouting, Tirzah felt the pain in her father's voice. Ram should have been here with his family helping. She knew she could handle Sari as well as Ram and nodded vigorously. "That's my girl." Her father patted her head. "Oren and the twins will bring the sheep, and Molid and I will see to the carts. When the signal is given, we will march." In another minute he was gone, and Tirzah swallowed hard. Sari stood with her head low, her long ears flopping down, her eyes mere slits. Carefully, Tirzah lifted one ear and spoke into it. "It will be all right, Sari. I'm here to take care of you." The little donkey brayed as if to say, "Humph." Though the wind still blew, it seemed to Tirzah as if it had changed directions. It no longer pelted her with sand, but she had to brace herself against its force. She could hear its roaring out to sea. Night had fallen, covering the mountains and the sky. Tirzah almost dozed, leaning against Sari. Then people were coming to life all about her in the dimness. Hastily a line of march formed. As Tirzah wiped the grit from Sari's leathery hide, she saw a flash of red hair flying behind the figure running toward them. Abihail. In a moment she was hugging her tightly. "Oh, Abihail, what will we do?" Tirzah cried, all her fears suddenly back. "Tirzah, it's a miracle, a miracle. The sea is parting." Moses held his rod up, and then the wind began, and now the water is gone. They say it's piling up like walls, and the sea floor is showing. Tirzah stared at Abihail. The sea floor is showing? She could hardly believe her ears. "Yes, yes," Abihail insisted, "and people are already starting to cross it. I can't stay even a minute more. Look for me later," she shouted back. Stunned, Tirzah watched her disappear into the crowd. Before she could think, the news came, passing from clan to clan, family to family. It was true. They were going to cross the sea, walk through it. Somewhere behind the cloud of glory was the Egyptian army. From the side toward Israel, the cloud glowed with light that fell on the people and the sea floor. It was like soft moonlight, and in spite of the heavy wind, Tirzah could see enough to walk. She urged the little donkey forward. Beside her, Maha took hold of Tirzah's hand with fingers that felt like ice. "I am so afraid, Tirzah. What if we get into the middle of the sea and the waters come back again? I can't even swim," she wailed, clutching Tirzah's hand tightly. Nahaleth answered quickly, "Never mind, you will float." They were almost at the edge of the sandy shore, or where the edge once had been. Underfoot the shore had changed to a wet, oozing sand that felt cold on bare skin. Nahaleth let out a little cry. "Oh, Maha, forgive me. If we live to reach the other side, I promise to give you my best blue fringe." A moment later, Nahaleth suddenly stopped walking and stood like a statue, her robe flapping in the wind. "I forgive you now, but just don't stand there. Move or the Egyptians will surely catch us," Maha pleaded. Nahaleth continued standing as if she were turned to stone. Tirzah pushed Sari forward into the wet sand, then turned to wait for Nahaleth. Something was wrong. Nahaleth stood there as if she no longer heard or saw, though Maha was shaking her sister and pleading with her. Tirzah stepped back and took one of her cousin's cold hands in her own, rubbing it to warm it. "Look, Nahaleth, there isn't any water now. It's almost dry, just a little damp." All about the sea floor were bunches of weeds, boulders, and muddy sea bottom, dark even in the light from the cloud. It was like nothing Tirzah had ever seen, and her own heart beat fast. "Come on, Nahaleth," Tirzah cajoled. "Yahweh is protecting us. See, we can walk safely here. The bottom is firm." She stamped her feet to show Nahaleth. People were beginning to pass around them, and Sari pressed against her impatiently. This time Tirzah stamped her foot in anger. "We can't just stand here. We have to keep up with the others." Nahaleth didn't move. Again, Sari pushed her nose against Tirzah's shoulder as if to nudge her on. "Come on, please, Nahaleth," Tirzah pleaded. "Look, you can hold on to Sari's rope if you want to." Without speaking, Nahaleth looked at Tirzah. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Gently, Tirzah took her cousin's arm and led her toward the donkey. With one hand holding tight to Sari, Nahalath allowed herself to be led, first by Tirzah and then by Maha. Twice Tirzah stopped to help Sari out of a tangle of seaweed and then around a boulder that stood in the way. Between them, Maha and Tirzah guided the silent Nahalath, who seemed unable to move on her own. They tried to hurry to keep up with the others around them. It was all Tirzah could do to keep pushing ahead.